As a park activist, I don't often speak to such an august gathering with senators and governors and congresspeople and so many leaders who are heroes of mine here. This is my second time in Portland. I was here 10 years ago speaking in one of your rec centers. This is a little bigger than that audience, and I'll try to live up to the day. It really is an honor to be here. I want to thank the Skanner and Bernie Foster for the courage to really strike this note on this special day for this leading edge of need and possibility in our country. I am really here because of Dr. King, and I came to that sort of unwittingly. 18 years ago, on Martin Luther King's birthday, a neighborhood boy whom I had never met was gunned down next to my home. It was a holiday. There were children playing in the street, and it was a drive-by shooting. He fell, collapsed in the tree box next to my home, and my housemate, who was an emergency room physician, tried there in the tree box to save his life. Ricky Magnus died in her arms. We'd seen murder before. At the time, the Capitol was the murder capital of the country. And the police were telling us in the wake of this killing to go inside, lock our doors, don't go out at night, don't talk to strangers, and whatever we do, don't go in Meridian Hill Malcolm X Park around the corner. Well, we had a meeting the following evening in my home. I wasn't sure if anyone would come because it was such a frightening time. And over 50 people packed into my house wanting to do something and not accepting the police instructions that the best thing to do was to leave this to the experts and go inside. Instead, we decided to form a community crime patrol, learning from the experience of a group of African-American grandparents in a neighborhood far tougher than ours, who had started a patrol not to be vigilantes, but to stand up for what was good and decent in their communities, night after night, block after block, saying hello to the people they knew in their neighborhoods to rebuild community. We did the same thing with 3 rules. We had to be multiracial. We couldn't carry a weapon because that was not the point. Our weapon was love for our community. And most importantly, we had to say hello to everybody we met, no matter what they looked like, what we thought they were up to, because that was the point, to build community. Well, the first place we went on our patrol was inside Meridian Hill Malcolm X Park. Unbeknownst to us at the time, the park was the single most violent national park in the Capital Region. We expected the worst. People said we were crazy to go in there. We had a little CB radio for protection from Radio Shack. Folks, don't buy your CB radios from Radio Shack. It lost its signal the moment we got near the park. So we really had nothing other than these kind of silly orange hats that we'd been instructed by this other neighborhood to wear with a proud name of our neighborhood emblazoned on them. Walked in the park, held our breaths, looked around. Nobody pounced on us. In fact, there was no one there. It was so dangerous that there was nobody in the park. And since there was no one to mug, there were no muggers. In fact, the park wasn't actually all that bad. It was forlorn, it was filled with graffiti and broken glass and missing lights, but there was also a kind of a serenity there. We didn't know at the time that this had been a Native American spiritual ground, that this had been a place of peace, even amid the riots that broke out around the corner after the assassination of Dr. King. All we knew was that there was something compelling about the place. And as we walked along, we got toward the center of the park, and up ahead we saw 2 shadowy figures lurking. I think shadowy figures always lurk. And we remembered what at this point seemed like a very stupid rule, that we had to say hello. And since I came up with this notion, I sort of felt like I had to go through with it. People said that I was fearless. This was not true. And we sort of sidled up to the first shadowy figure, and I held out a kind of a shaky hand. Fortunately, it was dark enough that you couldn't see how much the hand was shaking, and said, "Hi, we're here with the Neighborhood Crime Patrol. We're trying to make our neighborhood safer." There was a pause, kind of a bemused pause as I think about it now, and then the hand extended and said, "Well, I'm Reverend Morris Samuel. Welcome to Meridian Hill." Reverend Samuel was an ordained Baptist minister, had been in the same dorm room with Walter Fauntleroy in seminary. He'd been coming to the park for 36 years, nearly every day the weather was fair. He'd been a high school teacher and principal, and he was the mayor of the park. He courted his wife under a cherry tree that still stands at the bottom of the park. The second shadowy figure was a little more complicated. He shared my last name, but nothing in common with my life. He'd been homeless, he'd been an addict, he'd been a dealer, he'd been locked up, he couldn't read or write. But when Howard Coleman talked about the park that evening and in the ensuing nights, he had tears in his eyes. He said, "This used to be the most beautiful place in the world. Now look at it." Well, that evening was the beginning of Neighborhood 101 for me, and a tremendous amount of education that I went through at the feet of those two people and many others that they introduced me to. The first person became the founding chair of the Friends of that park, of Friends of Meridian Hill Malcolm X. And the second person became the volunteer leader for the entire National Capital Region of the National Park Service. And there, in the shadow of where the riots had torn our city apart after Dr. King's killing, we planted a stand for a new kind of community. And in 4 years' time, we reduced crime, working together, by 95%. Today, crime there is down. And it is holding. Today, crime is down 99%, and that park is one of the safest parks in the nation's capital. That was done without millions of dollars or hundreds of police. It was done with tens of thousands of people across the community of all colors and creeds and cultures who came together in peace to breathe life back into their community. In so doing, they produced massive impacts on their community to move everyone forward, what is now called greening for all. Sadly, there are many other parks in our capital that have not gone as far as that park. And as we moved forward there, we found many other parks and communities calling us for help. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about just one park that we found that was just about the worst park in the capital. Its stream, Watts Branch, was named after a slaveholding family, which sort of puzzled us in a city often known as the Chocolate City, how we could have a stream named after a slaveholding family. The entire stream valley was just a picture of injustice. We found tens of thousands of hypodermic needles in the park. We found a heroin market, open-air heroin market, that was one of the biggest in the capital. We found rampant illegal dumping and even 2 illegal dumps that had no license whatsoever. And when we tried to complain about the dumping to the Environmental Crimes Unit, an officer of the Environmental Crimes Unit arrested me for complaining too much. We found children with type 2 diabetes, children with hypertension, overweight children, mothers, overweight because they were disconnected from the park. Well-meaning parents had told their children, "Don't ever go in that park." Children would try to play on the neighboring streets and get hit by cars. Here in this very green city, our children had no green whatsoever. We found abandonment, massive abandonment of that whole neighborhood, erosion of the tax base. We found rampant unemployment. We found the drug market being the primary market for the economy in that stream valley. We found rampant gang violence and killing. A whole organization formed called Project Blessings for hurting parents because so many children had been killed. We found fecal coliform so rampant in the stream you could smell it. We found open breaks in the sewer lines pumping sewage waste directly into the stream where the children were still trying to play. And in the middle of all of this, even as we tried to find the hidden assets in the community, we found that Marvin Gaye's home, where he began his life of music as a young boy, was right there next to the stream. And we launched an effort to try to save the home. And when it seemed that it couldn't get any darker, one day we were there with Marvin Gaye's widow and children from the community, and we also were accompanied by my hero here in this city, who I'll name in a moment. And we came, and as we arrived, the dust was just arising from the destroyed Marvin Gaye home. It had been demolished. because there was a sense that it was just a public housing complex. There was nothing to celebrate. Who was Marvin Gaye anyway? So even as we were destroying the park and destroying the community, we were destroying any sense of pride and heritage in that community. And I turned to the children and I said, never forget what you see here today. This is a terrible injustice. And at that point, the fellow who was there with us from Portland said, hold on, Steve. Those are just bricks. What matters is what's in here. And if we remember this and we go on from here to honor the dream that Marvin Gaye sang about all over the world, we can turn this into something good. Well, ladies and gentlemen, that man is here tonight, and he's one of my really all-time heroes, one of the real heroes of Greening for all over this country and all over the world. He's the first African-American head of a national conservation organization, your own Charles Jordan. Charles, would you stand, please? So there is a great deal of injustice, but there are also dreams. And what we have found over and over in community after community, that there is a power in our heritage and there is a power in our dreams. And that we can move mountains when we bring together the memories of our elders, of what once was, with the dreams of our young people of what could be, of people who are not yet beaten down, have not yet given up, people like the Reach Up, Reach Out group over here of young people, people like the drum majors who you will be awarding scholarships to today. And we found, just as Dr. King found and Ella Baker found in Montgomery and elsewhere, that the children can in fact lead us. And so there in that park, with a group of African-American boys who were developing art as symbols of their heritage and pride, called Life Pieces to Masterpieces, we put together a petition, a call to action. And those children presented 2,000 signatures to the City Council, calling for a change in their community and committing themselves to direct action to make that happen. The youth natural leaders stepped up and began making programs happen along the length of the park, the most dramatic of which was going to the heart of one of the worst heroin markets in the city and saying, well, if we can have a market selling something illegal and unhealthy, why can't we have something selling something illegal that is legal and healthy, namely a farm market? And the children created a farm stand that has operated now for 7 years where the heroin market used to be. Nothing had ever been so powerful in making that happen. Those children did that. The children went to the worst part of the park where the drug needles were just, you had to wade through them, I am not kidding you, where they had to duck underneath invasive thorny vines just to get to school in the morning, where they had to watch junkies injecting each other in the neck because there was no vein they could use in their arms on their way to school. And they made a stand there and said, we want to make a dream come true in this spot. They saw a hill there and they saw a flat place and they thought, why can't this be an amphitheater? Why can't this be the Marvin Gaye Amphitheater? And people thought they were crazy, and they thought we were crazy for helping them do this. And darn if they didn't make it happen. We put up a sign after we cleared out a bunch of the invasive brush and removed tons and tons of rubble, ultimately 3.7 million pounds of trash and debris from the length of this park corridor. They put up a sign saying, talent show next Saturday. And people knew we had flipped because they knew we didn't have any talent. You're very lucky that I'm not singing for you today. And we turned up. We didn't have anything lined up. All we had was a mic. And the children came. This neighborhood happens to have the second highest percentage of children of any neighborhood in the city. And they came, and they sang. And it was beautiful. There in that horrible place, the worst part of the worst park in the capital, these children had turned it around, and the Marvin Gaye Amphitheater had come alive. It hit the Washington Post and a full-page spread the next day, believe it or not. It said, Song of the City. And the next thing you know, we had people calling us from all over the country wanting to contribute to the Marvin Gaye Amphitheater because the dream had been made real. It wasn't just talk. The children had lived it into action, and that was magic. And so today, we're working with young people with the Earth Conservation Corps who are learning job training and a new future and dream in their own lives, many of whom have been killed even as they've been working to move forward. I don't want to make light of the current challenges at this very moment, at this hour. And yet, in the middle of the worst of challenges, these young people are leading a way forward to a whole new kind of day. We've worked with young people incarcerated in the Oak Hill Juvenile Detention Facility and an organization called Mentoring Today to connect them with mentors, to bring them into green space, to teach them job skills, life skills, and basic reverence for life. And we've found that this has had a magic effect on people. As simple an act as bringing homeless children into the park to plant flowers can be transformational. We found that children, working with my late mentor, Josephine Butler, the daughter of sharecroppers and granddaughter of enslaved people, she never would allow that they were slaves. They were enslaved because they would never let their spirits be slaves. And we worked with the kids to plant, and as they dug into the soil, they took a step back. They never knew there were animals living in the dirt, because the dirt they knew was dead dirt. It was compacted and covered with concrete and broken glass. And there in the earth was this tiny miracle of creation, the earthworm. And they wanted to take the earthworm home as a pet. And Josephine said, "Oh no, he's got work to do. He's making the soil for the trees so the trees can make the air for you to breathe." The children looked at the earthworm with a new kind of respect. And the earthworms were put aside as they planted and then carefully returned to their homes when they finished planting. And in that little moment, there was a peace, a sense of the magic of life that some of these children had never really known before. And when we don't respect life, we don't respect our own lives or those around us, that's when, frankly, all hell breaks loose. These children went on to do great things, working in the park and recommitting to their own lives and their own communities. We took the old nightclub, which we thankfully did not allow to be torn down, where Marvin Gaye first performed, and working with the children, we transformed that into the Riverside Center. That nightclub is now alive as a hub of youth performance, mentorship, programming of all kinds, including healthy fitness and nutrition for that community. Soon there will be a green cafe for job training around the corner. The children are helping us to design a nursery, which will be the base of a citywide green job corps to show that the green economy can reach everybody. The park, meanwhile, is being transformed with $26 million of local and federal funds. One of the best sources of funds that helped launch this whole effort, the Urban Parks and Recreation Recovery Program, kicked in a major grant that seeded funding for the rest of the park reclamation. And that stage is now alive as the home of the Marvin Gaye Festival. The slaveholding family has lost its name in the park. The park is now known, actually thanks to lobbying on the Tavis Smiley Show by Charles Jordan, the park is known now and forever. The first site honored after Marvin Gaye. This is Marvin Gaye Park. And so, through this work, people like me, and there are thousands of us, really tens of millions of people engaged in this movement all over this country, all over the world, are dramatically changing our quality of life and reaching people who never before knew how much the earth could mean for their own lives. We're combating nearly every major urban problem that we have, combating crime and violence and bringing new safety and peace to forgotten communities, combating illness through wellness and prevention and nutrition in our community programming, and fighting for clean water and air as well as clean soil, and actually creating community gardens to help people who have been starving, not for lack of food, but for lack of any good food. We've infused educational programs with expeditionary learning that take off from the earthworm and expand into every part of the curriculum. And we've made a fundamental impact on community economics by bringing jobs and job training and even green enterprise development to some of our most forgotten communities. We've brought new pride and heritage to cultural and arts programming and music, and we've stood up for a new notion of what diversity really means, in which we don't lose our identity, but we find new ways of coming together. And so today, the challenge for this movement is, can we really do this for all? To look at the equity atlas that's been put out and is available outside the room, the regional equity atlas, you'll see that here in Portland, greening has done tremendous things. And I often feel like it's sort of coals to Newcastle to come here and talk about greening. And yet, so many of the poorest areas are those areas that are least served by green spaces. So many of the wealthy areas are those that are best served. So much of the migration of the population, poorer people out of the core of Portland, is fueled by a lack of investment in greening for all. I encourage all of you to look at this atlas as a challenge of what is possible. So this movement is taking root all over America. It's breathtaking. It's not talked about very much because it's so local. We don't generally have audiences like this, as I said, to celebrate it. But people are doing this in Newark. They're doing it in Oakland with the Green for All program through the Ella Baker Center for Human Rights. They're doing it in Philadelphia with the Village of Arts and Humanities, which has transformed 37 vacant lots into a continuous corridor of parks that are serving its community, as well as a nursery that's providing jobs. They're doing it all over America, and they're doing it well beyond here. In fact, the woman who won the Nobel Peace Prize, whom I met 20 years ago when she first came to this country, her belongings wrapped together in hemp, Wangari Maathai is doing this work all over Central Africa with tens of millions of people. She says, if we can have parks for rhinos in the wilderness, why can't we have parks for people in the inner city? And that is a challenge I think we all can rise to. There are too many places, too many people forgotten. As today's USA Today headline says, Dr. King's dream is still not fully realized. He left this earth in the middle of his fight against poverty. And I would suggest that the poverty we have of connection to the earth is absolutely pivotal in the economic poverty and the educational poverty and even the spiritual poverty that we've had to struggle with. I would suggest that parks and greening for all is really the new bus and lunch counter fight of this century. That we have a chance to really transform our whole country, not just for those who have been less fortunate, but for all of us. For me, this is not a matter of altruism. It is a matter of enlightened self-interest for our country and for our planet. And today, as we face some of the gravest threats ever to our whole planet with global warming, it turns out that some of the best solutions involve exactly what we're talking about. When we are training our young people in vocational skills, let's not train them for the last century. Let's make them green vocational skills so we're training them for this century and beyond. Today we have a challenge to ask our communities, ask our cities, to build on the kind of work that the governor and others have done in workforce development, to take what the mayor did, an amazing thing in going to Jefferson High School and setting up the office there to listen to people, to put our young people first, and to listen to them and to listen to the earth, to now invest in the possibility of a truly green future, a sustainable future for our communities, our cities, our country, and our planet. To take the UPAR fund that funded the work we did in the Marvin Gaye Park corridor and restore it. That fund is zeroed out right now at the federal level, and we want to challenge our senators and representatives to lead the way going forward in restoring those funds and building something much larger, which we've never had in this country, a commitment to invest in urban parks and the people that they will benefit, regardless of color, regardless of class. We need that today, now more than ever. Dr. King's dream is alive. The heroes are among us. Dr. King would now be 79 years old. At this moment this week, we mark the point when there have been more years passed since he died than he passed on this earth. And so there is a challenge for us as we recognize the scholarship award winners and we look for the heroes in our midst to live this dream among the people who are here. We have the Dr. Kings among us. No one of us can equal him, and yet all of us together can be something greater than perhaps he even ever envisioned. And so this is our challenge. And I would suggest that with all that you have done to lead the way here in Portland, you have a chance beneath the shadow of Mount Hood to rise to your own kind of mountaintop and set a new example to inspire the rest of our country and our planet. Thank you very much.